Now that you're finally back, hope you know you're easily replaceable. Kenneth Hoffman said it with that smirk he saved for moments when he thought he had the upper hand. I'd just walked into North Peak Engineering's main office after a week's vacation in Colorado Springs, and those were the first words out of his mouth. Not welcome back, or how was your trip? Just that. My name's Adam. I'm 49, and I'd been working government contracts for North Peak for 12 years. 12 years of clearances, relationships, and deals that kept the lights on. But Kenneth saw me as just another engineer in a cheap suit. Thanks for letting me know, I said, setting my briefcase down by my desk. He laughed like he'd made some brilliant joke and walked back to his corner office. I watched him through the glass partition, adjusting his tie and checking his reflection in his computer screen. Kenneth had been my boss for 3 years, ever since the company restructured. Before that, I'd reported directly to the CEO, Jonathan Rivers. Things were different then. I sat down and pulled up my emails. 47 messages about the Henderson defense contract, the one Kenneth had been bragging about for months, telling everyone how he'd landed the big fish. The $25 million fish that I'd spent 6 months nurturing through procurement channels he didn't even know existed. The phone rang. Colonel Patricia Barnes from the Department of Defense. Adam, good to have you back. We need to discuss the timeline adjustments for Phase 2. Of course, Colonel. Let me pull up the specifications. Kenneth's voice carried from his office. He was on another call, probably with Jonathan, taking credit for preliminary approvals that had come through while I was gone. I'd heard variations of this conversation before. The team really stepped up, he'd say. Good leadership makes all the difference. I finished the call with Colonel Barnes and stared at my computer screen. The cursor blinked in the search field of a job site I'd bookmarked months ago, but never used. My finger hovered over the mouse. 12 years. I'd built every government relationship this company had. I knew which procurement officers preferred technical specifications delivered in person, which ones needed 3 weeks minimum for review cycles, and which defense contractors were fighting for the same contracts we were. Kenneth knew none of this. He emerged from his office, straightening his jacket. Don't forget the quarterly report is due Friday, he said without looking at me. And Adam, next time you take vacation during a critical contract phase, maybe give the team a heads up. I nodded and watched him walk toward the elevator. The team, as if there was anyone else in this building who could navigate the labyrinth of federal procurement requirements that kept North Peak profitable. Something settled in my chest. Not anger, just clarity. I started at North Peak right out of the Navy. 27 years old, fresh from a deployment where I'd worked procurement logistics in some places the Pentagon preferred not to name publicly. Jonathan Rivers hired me himself back then, said he needed someone who understood how government contracts really worked, not just how they looked on paper. Those early years, I was everywhere. Trade shows in Washington, meetings in secure facilities outside Atlanta, conference calls that started at 5 a.m. because someone in Aberdeen Proving Ground needed clarification on technical specifications. I learned which officials had been there for decades and which ones were rotating through on 18-month assignments. I learned who made the real decisions and who just signed the paperwork. My security clearance was higher than anyone else's at North Peak, secret level, with compartmentalized access that took 3 years of background checks to obtain. The kind of clearance that couldn't be transferred or rushed, no matter how much money someone threw at the process. Kenneth didn't have any clearance at all. For 9 years, I worked directly with Jonathan. We'd sit in his office every Monday morning, going over pipeline opportunities, contract renewals, and relationship maintenance. He understood what it took to keep government clients happy. It's not about the lowest bid, he'd tell me. It's about trust and expertise they can't get anywhere else. Then came the restructuring. Jonathan said the company was growing, needed more layers of management. Kenneth came from a commercial construction background, had an MBA from somewhere in Atlanta. Fresh perspective, Jonathan called it. Someone who can bring business discipline to government contracts. Kenneth's first week, he asked me for a simple breakdown of our government business. I spent 3 days preparing a presentation that covered 12 active contracts, 18 potential opportunities, and the relationship map I'd built over nearly a decade. He listened for 20 minutes, then asked, "Can't we just bid lower and win more?" That should have been my warning. Over the next 3 years, I watched Kenneth take credit for every successful proposal while distancing himself from the complicated relationship work that made those successes possible. When Colonel Barnes called with questions, she asked for me specifically. When the folks at Huntsville wanted to discuss technical requirements, they scheduled calls around my availability, not Kenneth's. But in management meetings, Kenneth presented everything as his strategic vision. The worst part wasn't the credit stealing. It was watching him slowly convince himself that government contracts were just like any other business deal. He'd interrupt my calls with procurement officers to suggest efficiency improvements. He'd schedule meetings during times I'd specifically told him I was managing critical proposal deadlines. Last month, I'd overheard him telling Jonathan that the government division was finally running like a real business unit. As if the previous 11 years of steady growth and relationship building had been some kind of amateur operation. The tipping point came 3 days after Kenneth's easily replaceable comment. I was sitting in my truck outside the office, engine running, when my phone buzzed with a text from Sterling Solutions. "Adam, still interested in that senior partner position we discussed? Call me. Vincent Shaw." Vincent was the CEO of Sterling Solutions, North Peak's biggest competitor in the government space. We'd talked informally at a defense industry conference 6 months ago. He'd mentioned they were looking for someone with my background, but I'd brushed it off. Loyalty, I'd told myself. 12 years with one company meant something, but Kenneth's words kept echoing. Easily replaceable. I thought about Colonel Barnes, who'd specifically requested me for the Henderson contract, about the procurement officer at Wright-Patterson, who wouldn't return Kenneth's calls but always picked up when I called, about the 3 other major contracts currently in negotiation that existed solely because of relationships I'd spent years building. Easily replaceable. I called Vincent. "Adam, good to hear from you. Look, I'll cut to the chase. We just lost a senior partner to retirement, and we need someone who can step in immediately. Full partnership track, equity stake, and every government relationship you bring with you stays yours to manage. No micromanagement, no credit sharing." "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" 2 weeks to start, 1 week if you can swing it." I sat there for a long moment watching Kenneth through the office windows. He was gesturing animatedly in what looked like another phone call with Jonathan, probably explaining how well the government division was performing under his leadership. "Send me the paperwork," I said. The next morning I typed up my resignation letter. 2 sentences. "Effective immediately. I'm resigning from my position at North Peak Engineering. Thank you for the opportunity." I printed it, signed it, and walked it directly to Jonathan's office. He looked up from his computer, surprised. "Adam, what's this about?" "Kenneth's right," I said, placing the letter on his desk. "I am easily replaceable, so you won't have any trouble finding someone else to manage the Henderson contract, or the Wright-Patterson renewal, or the Aberdeen proposal that's due next month." Jonathan's face went pale as he read the letter. "Adam, wait. Let's talk about this." But I was already walking toward the door. "I've taken a position with Sterling Solutions. They seem to think my experience has value." I cleaned out my desk while Kenneth was at lunch. 12 years of files, contact lists, and relationship notes went into 3 boxes. The government contract database stayed on the company server, but the real relationships, the ones built on trust and years of reliable service, those walked out with me. Kenneth returned from lunch as I was loading the last box into my truck. He watched from the parking lot but didn't say anything. My phone buzzed as I drove away. A text to Kenneth's number, copied to Jonathan's. "Henderson Defense contract canceled. Effective immediately. Colonel Barnes." Jonathan called me at 6 p.m. that same day. I was at Sterling Solutions, signing paperwork in Vincent's office. "Adam, we need to talk. This is bigger than whatever happened between you and Kenneth." "Is it?" I kept my voice level. Vincent raised an eyebrow but continued reviewing contract details. "The Henderson contract is worth $25 million over 3 years. Colonel Barnes won't take Kenneth's calls. She's saying the deal is off unless you're managing it personally." I looked out the window of Sterling's 20th floor conference room. Downtown Memphis stretched out below us, the Mississippi River catching the last light of the day. That's unfortunate. Don't play games with me, Adam. 12 years should count for something. You're right. 12 years should count for something. But your restructuring put Kenneth in charge of decisions he doesn't understand, with relationships he didn't build, in a business he's never worked. Jonathan's voice sharpened. Kenneth's got an MBA from Emory. He knows business. Government contracts aren't business, Jonathan. They're relationships, trust, security clearances that take years to get and can't be transferred. Kenneth doesn't have clearance to access half the files necessary to manage the Henderson contract, let alone the technical expertise to answer Colonel Barnes's questions. We'll get him cleared. We'll bring in consultants. Secret clearance takes 18 months minimum with no guarantees. And Colonel Barnes has worked with me for 8 years. She trusts my judgment on technical specifications and timeline management. She's not going to start over with someone new because Kenneth has an MBA. There was a long pause. Vincent finished reading and slid the partnership agreement across the table. I signed it while Jonathan searched for words. What do you want? Jonathan finally asked. I want Kenneth to understand that some people aren't easily replaceable. This is about ego? This is about competence. Kenneth spent 3 years taking credit for work he didn't do, relationships he didn't build, and expertise he doesn't have. Now he gets to find out what North Peak's government division looks like without the person who actually runs it. I hung up and handed the signed contract back to Vincent. Rough conversation? He asked. Necessary one. My phone started buzzing with texts. Kenneth, finally understanding that the Henderson contract wasn't just paperwork, but a relationship with specific people who'd worked with me for years. Then Jonathan again, then someone from North Peak's legal department. I turned the phone off. The next morning brought 3 more canceled contracts. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base pulled out of a $15 million radar upgrade project. Aberdeen Proving Ground suspended negotiations on a testing facility contract worth $8 million annually. Each cancellation came with the same message: primary contractor relationship terminated. Vincent called me into his office at 10 a.m. Adam, I've got to ask, did you know this would happen? I knew that Kenneth had convinced himself that government contracts were just about having the right paperwork and submitting the lowest bid. I knew that he didn't understand the relationship component, or the security clearance requirements, or the technical expertise expectations. What I didn't know was how quickly the clients would make their preferences clear. And now? Now Kenneth gets to learn that easily replaceable is a theory that doesn't survive contact with reality. Vincent leaned back in his chair. Your old company just lost $48 million in active contracts because one manager told one employee he was easily replaceable. That's one way to look at it. What's the other way? Kenneth spent 3 years systematically undervaluing the person who built every government relationship North Peak had. He convinced himself that management credentials were more important than technical expertise and client trust. Now he's finding out what those relationships were actually worth. By noon, my phone had 17 missed calls from North Peak numbers. Vincent and I were reviewing Sterling's current government contract portfolio when my personal phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Memphis. This is Adam. Adam, this is Patricia Barnes. I wanted to call you directly. Colonel Barnes. I stepped out of Vincent's office and walked to the conference room. Colonel, good to hear from you. I'm calling because Jonathan Rivers has been trying to reach me for 2 days, and I think there's some confusion about the Henderson contract situation. I sat down and looked out at the Memphis skyline. What kind of confusion? Mr. Rivers seems to think this is a negotiation, that North Peak can somehow maintain the contract with different personnel. I wanted to make it clear that's not the case. I see. Adam, I've been working defense procurement for 15 years. I've seen contractors come and go, and I've learned that relationships matter more than company names. The Henderson project involves classified technology integration with timeline requirements that can't accommodate learning curves or personnel transitions. She paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. The technical specifications require someone with your specific background and clearance level. The timeline doesn't allow for training a replacement. And frankly, after 8 years of working together, I'm not interested in starting over with someone who doesn't understand how these projects actually work. I understand, Colonel. Do you? Because I've also had calls from Wright-Patterson and Aberdeen. The consensus is clear. We work with you or we work with other contractors. North Peak without Adam isn't North Peak as far as the Department of Defense is concerned. After the call ended, I sat in the conference room for 10 minutes processing what I'd just heard. It wasn't just about the Henderson contract. It was about the entire foundation of North Peak's government business. Vincent knocked on the door. Everything all right? Colonel Barnes just explained something to me that I'd never fully understood. Which is, for 8 years, I thought I was working for North Peak, building relationships that benefited the company. But from the client perspective, the relationship was always with me personally. The company was just the administrative framework. Vincent sat down across from me. That's not uncommon in government contracting. Technical expertise and security clearances are personal assets. They don't transfer with company letterhead. Kenneth never understood that. He saw government contracts as company assets that could be managed by anyone with the right business training. And now he's discovering that $48 million in annual contract revenue was never really North Peak's to begin with. It was mine, and I was sharing it with them. My phone buzzed with another call from Jonathan. I declined it. Vincent, I need to ask you something. How many of Sterling's government relationships are dependent on specific individuals? About 60%, maybe more. Government clients don't care about corporate structure or management philosophy. They care about competence, reliability, and trust, all of which are personal qualities. So when Kenneth told me I was easily replaceable, he was telling you that he didn't understand the business he was supposed to be managing. Classic corporate blindness, focusing on organizational charts instead of relationship maps. That afternoon, I learned that Kenneth had called a company-wide meeting to discuss temporary setbacks in the government division. According to my former colleague Stephen, Kenneth had spent an hour explaining how they'd overcome the current challenges through strategic partnerships and enhanced business development. Stephen texted me afterward. He actually said losing the contracts might be a blessing in disguise because government work is too restrictive anyway. I showed the text to Vincent. Your former boss is about to learn that some blessings come with very expensive price tags, he said. 3 days into my new position at Sterling Solutions, Vincent called me into his office with a proposal that made me understand why Kenneth's world was about to collapse completely. Adam, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding relationship-based contracts. What if I told you that Sterling has been waiting for exactly this opportunity for 2 years? I leaned forward. What kind of opportunity? The opportunity to absorb North Peak's entire government division by hiring the person who built it. Vincent pulled out a folder thick with contract proposals and relationship maps. We've been tracking North Peak's government business for years, waiting for the right moment to make a move. Your former company has great relationships but limited capacity. Sterling has enormous capacity but limited government relationships. And now? Now we have both. Colonel Barnes called me personally yesterday. She wants to fast-track the Henderson contract with Sterling as the primary contractor, and you as the technical lead. She's also recommending us for 3 other projects that were previously going to other firms. I studied the documents. Wright-Patterson was offering a contract extension worth $20 million over 5 years. Aberdeen wanted to expand their testing facility project to include Sterling's manufacturing capabilities. The numbers were staggering. Vincent, this isn't just about hiring me away from North Peak. This is about absorbing their entire government client base. Exactly. And it's all possible because one manager thought relationships were interchangeable. That afternoon, I made a series of calls to procurement officers I'd worked with for years. Each conversation followed the same pattern. I'd explain my move to Sterling Solutions and they'd immediately want to know about transferring existing contracts and exploring new opportunities. Major Helen Rodriguez from Aberdeen was the most direct. Adam, North Peak's current management seems to think government contracts are just paperwork. We need partners who understand that these projects involve national security considerations and can't be managed like commercial construction. By the end of the week, Sterling had received formal requests for proposal on 6 major contracts previously designated for North Peak. The total value exceeded $70 million over the next 4 years. Kenneth called me directly on Friday afternoon. "Adam, this is getting out of hand. Jonathan's willing to discuss a significant raise and a promotion if you'll consider coming back." I was in Sterling's new government contracts division office, which Vincent had set up specifically for the business we'd acquired from North Peak. "What kind of promotion?" "Director level. Your own department. Kenneth would report to you on government matters." "Interesting. What changed Jonathan's mind about the value of specialized expertise?" Kenneth's voice tightened. "Look, maybe I was wrong about some things, but you're destroying a company that gave you 12 years of opportunity." "Kenneth, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply working somewhere that understands the difference between management credentials and industry expertise." "The board is asking questions, Adam. They want to know how we lost $48 million in contracts in 1 week." "And what are you telling them?" "I'm telling them that some employees are vindictive when they don't get their way." I looked out the window at the Memphis skyline, the same view I'd had the day I signed with Sterling. "Are you also telling them that you never obtained security clearance for the contracts you were supposed to manage? Or that you've never worked a single government project from start to finish? Or that you told your only qualified government contractor he was easily replaceable?" Kenneth hung up. An hour later, Jonathan called. "Adam, I need you to understand something. Kenneth's gone. I'm prepared to offer you his position, plus equity, plus a 40% salary increase." "Jonathan, that's generous. But I'm curious about something. Why didn't any of this matter when Kenneth was convinced I was easily replaceable?" "Because I trusted his assessment of the situation." "And now?" "Now I know what 48 million in lost contracts feels like." The call came on Monday morning. Vincent knocked on my office door with a grin I'd never seen before. "Adam, you need to hear this." He put his phone on speaker. Jonathan Rivers's voice filled the room, tight with barely controlled panic. "Vincent, I'm calling to discuss a partnership opportunity between Sterling and North Peak." "What kind of partnership, Jonathan?" "We want to subcontract our government division to Sterling. Sterling would handle all government contracts and North Peak would focus on commercial projects." Vincent looked at me and raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting proposal. What would that arrangement look like?" "Sterling would take over all existing government contracts and relationships. North Peak would provide administrative support and facility access. Revenue would be split 60-40 in Sterling's favor." I leaned forward and spoke into the phone. "Hello, Jonathan." The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. "Adam, I should have known you'd be part of this conversation." "Actually, Jonathan, I am this conversation. Every government relationship you're trying to license to Sterling belongs to me personally. The clients made that very clear." "Adam, be reasonable. North Peak invested 12 years in your development. And Kenneth spent 3 years explaining how easily replaceable that investment was. Turns out he was wrong." Vincent took over. "Jonathan, here's our counteroffer. Sterling Solutions will consider acquiring North Peak's government division assets, office space, equipment, and administrative staff for fair market value. All contracts and client relationships stay with Adam and Sterling. That would eliminate our entire government division." "Yes," I said, "it would. Just like Kenneth eliminated it last week when he told me I was easily replaceable." "The board is meeting this afternoon, Adam. They're going to want explanations." "Tell them the truth, Jonathan. Tell them that Kenneth managed to lose 48 million in annual revenue by insulting the one person who actually generated it. Tell them that easily replaceable was the most expensive 11 words in North Peak's history." Jonathan's voice cracked slightly. "What do you want, Adam?" "I want Kenneth to understand what easily replaceable actually means." 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office at Sterling Solutions when Stephen called with news from North Peak. "Kenneth got fired yesterday," he said. "Board meeting lasted 6 hours. Jonathan's taking direct control of what's left of the government division, but there's nothing left to control." "What about the other employees?" "Most of the administrative staff transferred to Sterling with the asset acquisition. Engineering is focusing entirely on commercial projects now. About half the revenue base, but at least it's stable. And Kenneth. Word is he's having trouble finding another position. Government contracting is a small industry and everyone knows what happened. No one wants to hire the guy who drove away a $48 million business because he didn't understand how it worked. I looked out my office window. Memphis was growing on me. The river, the energy, the sense of possibility that came with working somewhere that valued expertise over ego. Stephen, thanks for keeping me informed. Adam? One more thing. Colonel Barnes called Jonathan directly yesterday. She wanted to make sure he understood that this wasn't personal against North Peak. She said you'd always been professional and that Sterling was lucky to have you. That was kind of her. She also said that Kenneth's behavior was an embarrassment to the industry and that his reputation was permanently damaged among procurement professionals. After the call, I sat quietly for a few minutes. Vincent knocked and entered. Everything all right? Just reflecting on how things change. 3 weeks ago, Kenneth was convinced that MBA credentials and management theory were more valuable than 12 years of relationship building and technical expertise. And now? Now he knows the difference. I started reviewing the Henderson contract specifications. Colonel Barnes wanted to accelerate the timeline, and we had the resources to deliver ahead of schedule. Kenneth's downfall became a cautionary tale throughout the defense contracting industry. His name circulated in procurement offices as an example of how corporate arrogance could destroy years of carefully built relationships. When he applied for management positions at other government contractors, his references included the fact that he had single-handedly eliminated $48 million in annual revenue through poor personnel decisions and a fundamental misunderstanding of how specialized industries operate. His LinkedIn profile remained largely unchanged for months, a testament to his inability to find employment in an industry where reputation mattered more than credentials. The defense contracting community, particularly in the Memphis and Atlanta regions, used Kenneth's case as a teaching example of how dismissing specialized talent could catastrophically damage a company's competitive position. Procurement officers who had worked with me for years made it clear that Kenneth's treatment of experienced contractors reflected poorly on his judgment and leadership capabilities. His attempts to rebuild his career in commercial construction were hampered by the industry's interconnected nature. Former colleagues and competitors had heard about North Peak's spectacular government division collapse. Kenneth's professional isolation deepened when Sterling Solutions' success with former North Peak contracts became industry news. Every successful project completion under my leadership at Sterling served as a reminder of what Kenneth had thrown away through his dismissive attitude and poor management decisions. His reputation never recovered from being the executive who proved that some people truly are irreplaceable, while others are all too easily forgotten. I signed the Henderson contract renewal in Colonel Barnes's office 6 months later, surrounded by the same procurement team I'd worked with for years. Sometimes the most valuable lesson is learning that respect earned through competence and dedication always outlasts the authority that comes from a corner office and an expensive degree.